China and India share a border. Together they make up more than a third of humanity. But when it comes to politics, economics, and how their societies work, they might be the most opposite countries on Earth. So how did two neighboring civilizations end up taking completely different paths? And why is that difference reshaping global power right now? One became the factory of the world. The other became a global hub for software and services. One is ruled by a single party with tight central control. The other is the largest democracy on Earth. Two massive countries, similar starting points, but radically different outcomes. So the real question is, why? Because when you look closer at geography, history, politics, and economics, you begin to see something fascinating. China and India didn't just develop differently, they developed in almost opposite directions. And understanding why helps explain some of the most important geopolitical shifts happening in the world today. If you're interested in how geography, borders, history, and global power shape our world, consider subscribing for more videos like this. Because the story doesn't start in the 21st century, it begins thousands of years ago. China formed early as a highly centralized civilization. More than 2,000 years ago, the Qin dynasty unified large parts of the country under a single administrative system. That meant something very important. One government, one bureaucracy, one political structure controlling a vast territory. From that point forward, Chinese history repeatedly returned to strong centralized rule. Even when dynasties collapsed, the political idea of a unified empire remained. India followed a completely different path. The Indian subcontinent was historically a patchwork of kingdoms, cultures, and languages. Powerful empires did exist, like the Maurya Empire or later the Mughal Empire, but they rarely controlled the entire region for long. Instead, political authority was constantly shifting between regional powers. Geography played a huge role in this difference. China's population centers developed around large river systems like the Yellow River and the Yangtze. These fertile plains supported dense populations and made centralized administration easier. India, however, is geographically far more fragmented. The Himalayas dominate the north. The Thar Desert lies in the northwest. Dense forests and mountains stretch across the northeast. And between these barriers lies the Deccan Plateau, surrounded by multiple major river systems. For centuries, these natural divisions encouraged regional identities instead of a single centralized state, and those patterns still shape both countries today. But the most important divergence came much later. In the 20th century, both China and India emerged from periods of foreign domination and internal turmoil. Both faced the same fundamental challenge. How do you build a modern nation-state? Yet once again, they chose opposite paths. China became a one-party state under the Communist Party. India became a democratic republic, the largest democracy in the world. And this single difference shaped almost everything that followed. In China, decisions can be made extremely quickly. If the government wants to build a high-speed rail network, it can push the project forward at remarkable speed. Cities expand rapidly. Industrial zones appear almost overnight. Infrastructure projects move at massive scale. China now has the largest high-speed rail network in the world. India works very differently. Because it is a democracy with many political parties, powerful regional governments, and complex legal processes, decisions often take far longer. Infrastructure projects may take years of debate, negotiation, and approval. But that same complexity also creates a different kind of system. China often prioritizes efficiency and long-term planning. India often prioritizes debate, competition, and political representation. And this leads to a fascinating contrast. China tends to move fast. India tends to move slowly, but sometimes more flexibly. This difference becomes even clearer when we look at the economy. Over the past 40 years, China transformed itself into the factory of the world. Massive manufacturing zones, gigantic export industries, state-sponsored industrial policy. Factories across China produce everything from electronics to machinery. Global supply chains depend heavily on Chinese manufacturing. India, however, developed a very different economic structure. Instead of focusing primarily on manufacturing, India became a global center for services, software development, IT outsourcing, technology consulting. Cities like Bangalore became major tech hubs. While China often builds the hardware, India frequently writes the software behind it. Two different economic models emerging from two different systems, and both now play crucial roles in the global economy. But the contrasts don't stop there. China is relatively homogeneous compared to India. More than 90% of China's population belongs to the Han ethnic majority. India, on the other hand, is one of the most diverse countries on Earth. Hundreds of languages, multiple major religions, dozens of large ethnic groups. This diversity makes India culturally vibrant but politically complex. China emphasizes unity and national cohesion. India constantly balances competing regional, linguistic, and religious interests. Managing that diversity is one of the biggest challenges of Indian democracy. But now, the global context is shifting again. Many international companies are looking to diversify their supply chains. This strategy is often called the China Plus One approach. Instead of relying entirely on Chinese manufacturing, companies are expanding production to other countries, and one of the main destinations is India. India's advantages are becoming increasingly clear: a young population, a growing middle class, a massive domestic market. But China still holds a major lead in several areas. Its infrastructure is more advanced. Its manufacturing ecosystem is deeply integrated. Its export capacity is enormous. So the question isn't simply which country will dominate. The more interesting question is this: which system works better over the long term? A centralized model focused on efficiency and state planning, or a democratic system driven by competition, debate, and private initiative? And this is where the contrast between China and India becomes most visible. China represents centralized authority, coordinated planning, and rapid infrastructure development. India represents diversity, political freedom, and decentralized decision-making. Two different models for modernization, two different approaches to development, and both will shape the future of the global economy. Because together, China and India represent more than 1/3 of humanity. What happens inside these two countries will influence trade, technology, geopolitics, and global power for decades to come. But there's one final piece of the puzzle that many people overlook: timing. China began its major economic reforms in the late 1970s. India's major economic liberalization began in the early 1990s. That means China had almost a 20-year head start, and that head start explains a large part of today's economic gap. But India's growth is accelerating, infrastructure is expanding, digital innovation is booming, and India now has one of the youngest populations in the world. China, meanwhile, is aging rapidly, and that demographic shift could reshape the balance between the two countries in the coming decades. China and India may share a border, but in many ways, they represent two opposite paths of development: centralization versus diversity, authoritarian efficiency versus democratic complexity, manufacturing power versus service innovation. And that contrast is exactly what makes their story so important, because the future of the global economy may depend on how these two very different systems evolve. If you're fascinated by geopolitics, world maps, borders, and the hidden forces shaping global power, check out the next video. There's a lot more to uncover about how geography shapes our world.